All right, welcome to the American Vindicta Show. Let's get right into it. Spain admits to spraying deadly chemtrails as part of the UN secret program 1 month after March 2020 COVID-19 lockdown. It's coming to you from globalresearch.com. The Spanish government ordered from April 16, 2020, a month after March 2020 lockdowns began, for their military to quietly spray lethal chemtrails on its citizens with United Nations authorization under the cover of the state of emergency for the management of the health crisis situation caused by COVID-19. That's a quote. The chemtrail program, which involves the spraying of biocides on the population, was authorized by royal decree, was quietly acknowledged by the government on April 16, 2020, just 1 month after the World Health Organization announced that COVID-19 was a pandemic. Order SND, that would be Sierra November Delta 351-2020, published by the Spanish government in the official state gazette, reads as follows. Order Sierra November Delta 351-2020 of April 16th, which authorizes the armed forces and units and military emergency units to use biocide chemicals authorized by the Ministry of Health for disinfection in order to deal with the COVID-19 health crisis. Royal Decree 463-2020 of March 14th hereby declares a state of emergency for the management of the health crisis situation caused by COVID-19, which includes a series of measures aimed at protecting the welfare, health, and safety of citizens and the containment of the progression of the disease and strengthen the public health system. Health Minister Salvador Iarroca was also granted extra powers to, quote, dictate orders to the military during the, quote, health emergency. Specifically, in accordance with the provisions of Article 4.3 of Royal Decree 463/2020 of March 14th, the Minister of Health is empowered to dictate the orders, resolutions, provisions, and interpretive instructions that, within their scope of action, as a delegated authority, are necessary to guarantee the provisions of all services, ordinary or extraordinary, in order to protect of people, goods, and places through the adoption of any of the measures provided for in Article 11 of Organic Law 4/1981 of June 1st of the States of Alarm, Exception, and Cite. For the effective fulfillment of these measures, the competent authorities delegates may require the action of the armed forces in accordance with the provider for in Article 15.3 of Organic Law 5/2005 of November 17th of the National Defense. The Ministry of Health acknowledged it had been evaluating the vericidal capacity of the chemical disinfectants. The Ministry of Health has been publishing and updating the list of biocides to be used against new coronaviruses, authorized and registered in Spain according to the UNE-EN 14476 standard, which elevates the virucidal capacity of antiseptics and chemical disinfectants. In particular, due to their special effectiveness, some biocides are established in Main Group 1 of Article 1.1 of Royal Decree 830/2010 of June 25th, which establishes the regulations governing training for carrying out treatments with biocides. The Spanish government has ordered explicitly for the use of aerial media in aerial disinfection techniques in order to reach, quote, all surfaces quickly via techniques of nebulization, thermonebulization, and micronebulization. Among the most infected disinfection techniques are the use of aerial media. Then through them, with techniques of nebulization, thermonebulization, and micronebulization, all surfaces are reached quickly, avoiding depending on manual application, which is slower, and sometimes does not reach all surfaces because there are obstacles that prevent reaching them. The CBRN, that is the Chemical, Biological, Radiological, and Nuclear Defense Units of the Armed Forces and Military Units of Emergencies, UME, have personal means, materials, procedures, and the sufficient training to carry out aerial disinfection, since they are operations that execute regularly, with the exception that instead of using biocidal products due to it having decontaminating chemicals. It is therefore that in view of the foregoing and the effective improvement in streamlining the operations of disinfection of all types of facilities that the armed forces personnel come to carry out, it is considered appropriate to authorize exceptionally and for the duration of the state of the alarm that the CBRN defense units of the armed forces and the UME, that's the Military Unit of Emergencies, the use of disinfectants and biocides from Main Group 1 described in Article 1.1 of Royal Decree 832010 of June 25th, which establishes the regulations. It's not the first time the Spanish government has been embroiled in a chemtrail scandal. In 2015, 4 state meteorological agency whistleblowers announced via the European Parliament that planes were regularly spraying throughout Spain. Quote, on May 19, 2015, MEP Ramon Tremosa of Barcelos, ALDE, announced in the European Parliament that 4 workers from the State Meteorological Agency had confessed that Spain is being sprayed entirely from planes that spread lead dioxide through the atmosphere, silver iodide, and diatomate. The objective, according to the same MEP, would be to ward off the rains and allow temperatures to rise, which creates a summery climate, which has an environment for tourism, and at the same time helps corporations and the agricultural sector. This is in turn producing cold drops of great intensity. So, all the BS that's out there about chemtrails, well, Spain admits that they're doing it. We see it in our skies all the time. I remember, back when I was still working for the agency, and chemtrails were all the rage. And, for a while doing what I do, you don't pay attention to stuff like that because you have other things to worry about, right? And then you start hearing about these people within these realms of conspiracy, the Alex Jones and InfoWars, and the Steve Quell and the Hagmans and the Dave Hodges and, the Jesse Venturas and all this stuff. And then we start to look up into the skies. And I remember the University of Texas out of Austin actually collected samples of these very strange spiderweb looking, I don't know what you want to call it. Looks like spider webs falling from the sky. And they were taking them and they were doing experiments on it, trying to figure out just what it was, where it came from, because they were all over the place. And turns out they had human DNA in it. I remember Alex Jones actually talking about that. And there's another thing that came from it. I think it's called Morgellons disease, where it actually has like fibers. If you touch this stuff, these fibers start to grow out of your skin. Apparently, it's very painful. So, we know they admit to cloud seeding using silver iodide, spraying that over a cloud, and then it causes the cloud to then, the water particles in the cloud to become heavy and they fall like snow. It's good for tourism. They use it in other parts of the world for actually irrigating crops. China does it. Last time I checked, I think China said that they generate up to 40 billion gallons of false rain precipitation every year for their crops. That's a lot of rain. But the problem with this is the amount of heavy metal particulates from the halides, from the different chemical compositions of the metals that are being sprayed. That gets into everything. Your water gets into your food. You ingest it, becomes part of you. Many people get sick. Many people have a spike of diseases that we can't explain as to why they're occurring. And, as usual, Big Pharma comes out with some sort of a cure. What's the point of all this? I will tell you that if you used chemical, biological, nuclear, and radiological weaponry correctly, you could cloud seed chemical rainstorms and wipe out entire populations if you knew the right things to put in the clouds at the right time. Just imagine if these crazy scientists like the Nazis that we brought over from Germany were able to take, I don't know, Cyclone B, put it into the air. What about, Terran? What about, or Tabin, excuse me, not Terran, Tabin. What about some of these nerve agents? Put them up into the clouds and let them drop down. How about mustard gas? That's a good one. What about a cloud raining down mustard gas? It would be very similar to a volcanic eruption and the acid rain that comes down from it, the sulfur. It's a great idea for whenever you want to completely destroy the food source of a country. Do you ever sit back and you think, while all these things are happening in the country, probably more than half of the country is in a severe drought, and the other half of the country is in a severe wildfire watch? My area that I live in North Texas, is in a severe wildfire watch. I've never seen that since I've been here. And I've been in this area for, I think this one area for at least 5 years now. It's the first time we've seen that. Very strange. We have all the death of all the cattle, of all the chickens. I start to piece these things together, and I start asking myself, are they really poisoning the skies to poison us? Do they not know it will poison them and their families as well? So, I do, I say that I do believe in chemtrailing, but that's an incorrect statement. We do chemtrailing. The military does use chemtrailing. The federal government does use chemtrailing. There's actually a way to spread metal halides in the air to mask airplane traffic from radar. So, I'm not shocked that these things are happening, especially like in Spain, but what are the after effects of all this? You know, if our government had it come to the surface, and it still might. I'm not going to say that we haven't done this yet, but if it comes to the surface that the U.S. government under Trump was cloud seeding biocide in the air on our populace, what do you think the opinion of Donald Trump would have been? And do you think Donald Trump would have approved that? You don't know. It's just a speculation. But it's an extreme measure. Just as the inoculation was an extreme measure, because COVID was such a risk to the world, as we are told. Now, one of the things that I have seen particularly strange is that when you start to mix all these chemicals and you put them into the air, you disperse them through the water, it gets into the food, it gets into the grass, the soil, you know, the things that your kids run barefoot on. At least mine do. I can't keep shoes on my kids. That's mixing in with their skin, their clothes, you know, gets in their hands, gets in their mouth. It's almost like it's unavoidable now, isn't it? But what are the long-term effects? How much disease, how much unknown cancer or known cancer has been caused by this? Are there any things out there that are similar to this? Well, MK Naomi was the code name for a joint Department of Defense with the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. It was a research program lasting from the 1950s through the 1970s. Unclassified information so far about MK Naomi is that the program and the related Special Operations Division is so far very scarce. There's not much info on it. It is generally reported, though, that MK Ultra, that MK Naomi was to be a successor to the MK Ultra project, at least the part on focusing on biological projects, including the biological warfare agents. Specifically, to store materials that could either incapacitate or kill a test subject, and to develop devices for the diffusion of such materials. Now, as we have learned previously in these discussions about the CIA and the Department of Defense and their psychochemical weapons, psychoweapons, one of the things that they were very fond of was the ability to use a gaseous unit, a gaseous weapon that will disperse either nerve agent to incapacitate or a hallucinogen to disorientate a crowd, like riot control ammunition, chemical weaponry that's used by the police and also by the U.S. military for defensive measures. And then we also have other things like, CN gas. There's a difference between CS and CN. CS gas is still used as the kind of like the most extreme of the chemical weapons for law enforcement, and it will make you cough very bad. It's also, sometimes confused with tear gas. The other one is CN, and that will make you do all different types of strange things with your bodily fluids. CN gas, not good. Still in use today, though. So, during its first 20 years, the CIA has engaged in projects designed to increase the U.S. biological and chemical warfare capabilities. Now, the biological and chemical warfare is also what we know as the WMD, or weapons of mass destruction, which that's your chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, or any other weapon that can kill and bring significant harm to numerous individuals or cause great damage to artificial structures and buildings, natural structures, mountains, or the biosphere. The biosphere. The biosphere, occasionally also known as the ecosphere, is the worldwide sum of all ecosystems. It can also be termed as the zone of life on Earth. The biosphere is virtually a closed system with regard to matter, with minimal inputs and outputs, which means where you live, where animals are the most abundant, that is what our weapons are aimed to kill. Now, the scope and usage of that term has evolved, and it's disputed quite a bit, but it's oftentimes it just signifies more politically than technically. It's originally coined in reference to aerial bombing with chemical explosives, like during World War II. The chemicals that we use, an explosive for this, I guess you could say demonstration, is just more or less just the reactive substance that contains great amounts of potential energy for large explosions, okay? And the Axis powers and the Allies dropped these weapons on each other. And it has later come to refer to a more large-scale, almost industrial-scale weaponry or warfare-related technologies where chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear warfare have been adapted, they've been advanced, they've been technologically enhanced, and if anything, the bombs went from great big bombs to very small, sleek bombs that are way more lethal. So at one point in time, these bombs had to be, built in mass factories, like the Fat Man and Little Boy that was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Great big bombs. And now we have small, sleek bombs that instead of having a plane fly right over the target and dropping the ordnance, we can send that missile from a very, very, very long distance. We've only gotten better at killing each other. Moral of the story. Now, getting back to MK Naomi. Project Naomi was initiated to provide the CIA with a covert support base. And this support base was used to meet its top secret operational requirements. The goal was to have a robust, lethal arsenal of incapacitating materials with the CIA's Technical Services Division, which is a component of the CIA that basically only operates in clandestine operations with gadgets and disguises and gizmos and secret handshakes and the heart attack guns and the spies that are 2 and 3 layers deep, and at that point they don't even know who they actually work for. Now, this would enable the Technical Services Division of the CIA to serve as a center for supplying biological and chemical materials. Imagine when you have become so deep and entrenched that you took on the religion of the area, you took on the lingo, you took on the mindset, and you started to befriend them. Now, there's a certain psychological definition for whenever you start to befriending the enemy and seeing them as the good guys, seeing them as your friend. Could you imagine how many different times we've had agents that you'll never hear about? It'll just be a little star on a wall that had to be taken out because they drifted a little too far into the void and they never came back to our side. What assets did those people take with them and share with our enemies? We'll never know. Surveillance, the testing, the upgrading, the evaluating of all these special materials and the items, it was provided by MK Naomi to ensure that no defects or unwanted contingencies ever emerged during any operational conditions. The U.S. Army Special Operations Command was specifically assigned to assist the CIA and the Technical Services Division of the CIA with this same development of testing and maintaining the procedures for biological agents and their delivery systems. Both the CIA and the Special Operations Command modified guns to fire special darts coated with biological agents and poisonous pills. You know, at one point, even the USSR had the poison bullets. The darts could actually incapacitate guard dogs, allowing agents to infiltrate areas that dogs were guarding, and then would be used to awaken the dogs upon exiting the facility. In addition to all this, the Special Operations Command was designated to research the potential to use biological agents against other animals and food crops. A 1967 CIA memo, which was uncovered by the Church Committee. If you don't know who they are, the Church Committee was a U.S. Senate that was a select committee in 1975 that investigated abuses by the Central Intelligence Agency and the National Security Agency, NSA, to include the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the IRS. Who would have known that from the 50s to the 70s, there was a point in time when the CIA, NSA, FBI, and IRS were experimenting upon U.S. citizens, spying on U.S. citizens without proper search warrants, kidnapping people, drugging people, and in some rare occasions, torturing them to death to see what they would do. And none of these agencies were ever banned, were ever banished, were ever broken apart, and no one went to prison. Now, the Church Committee, they uncovered evidence of at least 3 covert techniques for attacking and poisoning crops that had been tested under field conditions. That means they actually went out and they tested this in the field for real. They really went out and sprayed stuff. On November 25th, 1969, President Richard Nixon had banned any military use of biological weapons from Project MK Naomi, and eventually the project was dissolved. On February 14th of 1970, a presidential order had outlawed all stockpiles of bacteriological weapons and non-living toxins. Bacteriological weapons, also known as germ warfare. Germ warfare is the use of biological toxins or infectious agents, such as bacteria and viruses, insects, and fungi, with the intent to kill, harm, or incapacitate humans, animals, or plants as an act of war. Now, despite the presidential order, a CIA scientist was able to acquire an estimated 11 grams of deadly shellfish toxin from the Special Operations Command personnel at Fort Detrick, Maryland. The toxin was stored in a CIA laboratory where it remained undetected for over 5 years. You think it just sat on the shelf? They never tested it. They never replicated it. If you do, you're wrong. Let's go to the next one. Project Chatter. Project Chatter was a United States Navy program beginning in the fall of 1947 that focused on the identification and testing of drugs in interrogations and the recruitment of special agents. Their research included laboratory experiments on both animal and human subjects. The program operated under the direction of Charles Savage of the Naval Medical Research Institute in Bethesda, Maryland from 1947 to 1953. The project was geared to identifying agents, both synthetic and natural, that were effective during interrogation. The project was centered on, but not restricted to, the use of anabasine, an alkaloid, scopolamine, and mescaline. Now, anabasine is a pyridine and a piperidine alkaloid that's found in the tree tobacco plant, a close relative of the common tobacco plant. It is used as an industrial-grade insecticide. Scopolamine, also known as hyoscine, or the devil's breath, is a natural or synthetically produced tropine alkaloid and a anti-cholinergic drug that is formerly used for motion sickness and for anti-nausea and vomiting. It's also used in surgery to decrease the saliva production. Mescaline is a naturally occurring psychedelic protoalkaloid of the substituted phenethylamine class, known for the hallucinogenic effects comparable to those of LSD and psilocybin mushrooms. This project, which focused around both animal and human subjects, was ended shortly after the Korean War in 1953. But don't forget, the things that they were using was for interrogation on humans. Humans, okay? Project Artichoke, also referred to as Operation Artichoke, was a Central Intelligence Agency project that researched specifically into the different methods of interrogation. For those of you who don't know, interrogation is interviewing something as commonly employed by law enforcement, military personnel, intelligence agencies, organized crime syndicates, and terrorist organizations with the goal of eliciting useful information, particularly information related to a certain topic or crime. All right, let's go. So, preceded by Project Bluebird, Project Artichoke officially arose on August 20th, 1951, and was operated by the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence. Scientific Intelligence Division was a department of the CIA that was created back in 1963 and was incorporated into the Directorate of Science and Technology divisions. The primary goal of Project Artichoke was to determine whether a person could be involuntarily made to perform an act of attempted assassination. The project also studied hypnosis, forced morphine addiction, and subsequent forced withdrawals, and the use of other chemicals including LSD to produce amnesia and other vulnerable states in subjects. You've all heard me talk about Project MKUltra. Okay, just real quick. Project MKUltra was the code name for a quasi-legal human experimentation program designed and undertaken by the CIA that more or less purposely intoxicated people with various different types of drugs, barbiturates, LSD, high levels of caffeine, tobacco, psilocybin mushrooms, alcohol, marijuana. That they experimented on people just to see what the body would do. And there was over 30 universities in the United States that participated with this experiment via the DoD and the CIA in their little contracts that they made under the radar, and experimented on the children who went to the universities. So, that's MKUltra. Now, Artichoke led to MKUltra. Okay? Artichoke came before MKUltra. And like MKUltra and like many of these other things that are out there, I think Project Artichoke is still in play. I think you can take assassinations and active shooters and you can break down stuff like Operation Artichoke, and you can see significant reoccurrences of behavioral patterns, amnesia, aggression, the random acts of violence, the psychosis. You know, eventually you have to sit back and you go, well, is every person in our country a potential active shooter if they have one of these symptoms, or if we know that they have all of these symptoms? Should we use stuff like red flag laws to disarm them? Well, this is the thing. That's a bullshit cop-out. Because what they try to do is they try to pin that on veterans and members of the American military and law enforcement, and then anyone who with PTSD or traumatic brain injury. And then you also have regular old civilians who have any type of, psychological problems. And they say these people shouldn't have guns, even though 90% of people can be medically treated, and as long as there's intervention with counselors or with therapists and seen by psychologists, they're fine. What happens when they're not? What happens when they are kidnapped, they are drugged, they are forced into addiction, and then they are ripped off of that morphine, ripped off that LSD, that heroin? The mind, like a rubber band, stretches into the imagination, into the depths of the void, and then bam, the rubber band snaps back to, and the mind does not know how to process reality with fantasy. And then you have a conflict of chemical imbalances. And also the body is being poisoned. So now the body is overreactively working to rid itself of poisons, of toxins, but also due to the heavily laced hallucinogenic elements that are in these toxins. There's nothing that the mind can do. And because of this these reactions, these violent reactions that happen within the brain. We can then pull together and piece together, you and I, what exactly is happening with these active shooters. Now, I've gone over Buffalo. I've gone over the Brooklyn shooter. I've gone over the shooter in Uvalde. They were all on something. They were all taking a medication. They were all known to law enforcement. They all had the snap. Is it surprising to hear that 50 years ago, well, let's say 70 years ago, the CIA then was messing with the ability to make people involuntarily perform an act of attempted assassination? What's the difference in assassination and mass killings? Hypnosis, forced addiction, forced withdrawal, the use of other chemical weapons, including LSD, to produce amnesia. Amnesia. How strange how many of these shooters, like the guy who shot up the movie theater, Aurora, Colorado, had no idea what was going on, was in a dumb stupor for days, as what me and some other colleagues of mine would say that this man is coming down from some sort of a drug. That's why he looks the way he does. That's why his eyes, his face, his mannerisms, his body movement, his body language is not matching what we would think a man who just walked around and shot a bunch of people for fun is. It's like if we caught the wrong guy, right? Amnesia does that. Amnesia is a deficit in the memory, which is caused by brain damage or disease. It can also be caused temporarily by the use of various sedatives and hypnotic drugs. The memory can be either wholly or it can be partially lost due to the extent of damage that is caused. There are two types of amnesia. You have retrograde amnesia and anterograde amnesia. Retrograde amnesia is the inability to retrieve information that was acquired before a particular date, usually the date of an accident or operation. In some cases, the memory loss can extend back decades, while in others, the person may lose only a few months of memory. Anterograde amnesia is the ability to transfer new information from the short term into the long term. So people with anterograde amnesia cannot remember things for long periods of time, and these two types are not mutually exclusive, and both can occur actually simultaneously. Okay, now let's get back on track. Project Artichoke was originally a mind control program, and it gathered information together with various intelligence divisions from the armed forces. By that I mean the United States Armed Forces Department of Defense. So we have the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Federal Bureau of Investigations. The scope of the project was outlined in a memo dated January 1952 that asked, quote, "Can we get control of an individual to point where he will do our bidding against his will and even against fundamental laws of nature, such as self-preservation, which means the act of suicide?" This was a real question that was asked to our intelligence agencies. in the terms of how can I manipulate an individual? How can I put them in my hands? And I want them to do my bidding. I want this guy to take this pistol. He's not going to remember who gave it to him. He's not going to remember anything for the next months anyways. And I want him to go up to President Reagan. And I want him to shoot him. I want him to go over to this person over here. And I want them to stab them. I want them, like Charles Manson, to gather a group of people together and use various forms of witchcraft and drugs. And I want them to convince groups of people to become mass murderers. What an interesting thing for the greatest nation to be asking. Not just the greatest nation, but the greatest generation that just came out of the victory of World War II. How quickly did we go from defending the world against the Nazi Empire and the Imperial Japanese Empire to now, I want to be able to control somebody. Doug, I want you to tell me how I can kidnap a guy off the street. I want you to set up the hotel. I want you to bring in your buddies. Bring in the tools that you need. It's a blank check. This guy needs to kill somebody for us. Can't be us. We have to have plausible deniability. And don't worry about this guy. He's a nobody. His family won't miss him. But we have a time. I need it started tonight. Get going. There's your memo. And our government, without questioning, did this. Project Artichoke was the Central Intelligence Agency's secret code name for carrying out in-house and overseas experiments using LSD, hypnosis, and total isolation as forms of a psychological harassment for special interrogations on human subjects. Very similar to what happens in Guantanamo Bay. Oh, and this was on human subjects, by the way. At first, agents used cocaine, marijuana, and heroin, peyote, mescaline, but they increasingly saw LSD as the most promising of all the drugs. The subjects who left this project were fogged with amnesia, resulting in faulty and vague memories of the experience, where it reminds me quite a bit of the people who are, I'm going to say this and just take it in a grain of salt as I say this, people who were abducted by aliens and experimented on. You may not always be being abducted. You may be being kidnapped by your government. Do not think it does not happen. What do they test? Oh, maybe testing for the radiation that is leaked out across the world, but we may get to that in another story. In 1952, same time, all the UFO madness was starting to occur. And this is, right after, just a few years after Roswell. LSD was increasingly given to knowing CIA agents to determine the drug's effects on unsuspecting people. One record would state that an agent was kept on LSD for up to 77 days. Think he recovered? You think he didn't have a fractured mind? Our dear late departed brother, Russ Dizdar, God rest his soul, if that man was here, I'd have him talking with me right now. If that man was still alive, I'm just going to be honest with you, I'd be studying at his feet. Because with what I know from law enforcement and from the military and a little bit of this intelligence stuff and what that man knows about the spiritual warfare, I don't think there's enough pencils and notebooks to take enough notes. But I wish I could have. So, peace be to you, Russ. You're back home. But this is how they shattered people, as Russ Dizdar would say. Artichoke would go on to research the potential dengue fever and various other diseases. Dengue fever is a mosquito-borne tropical disease that is caused by the dengue virus. The symptoms typically begin within 3 to 14 days of the infection, which is high fever, headache, vomiting, muscle and joint pains. Very characteristic skin itching and skin rash would develop. A declassified Artichoke memo. It's quoted saying that not all viruses have to be lethal. The objective includes those that act as short-term and long-term incapacitating agents. The term incapacitating agent means, and this is by the U.S. Department of Defense who created this, that it is an agent that produces temporary physiological or mental effects, or both, which will render individuals incapable of concerted effort in the performance of their assigned duties. It describes an agent which renders a person unable to harm themselves or others, regardless of consciousness. Now, the lethal agents are primarily intended to kill, but incapacitating agents can also kill if administered in potential enough doses, high enough doses, or in very certain scenarios. The incapacitation part, when used in general senses, is not equivalent to the term disability, as used in occupational medicine. It actually denotes the inability to perform a task based on quantifiable physical or mental impairment. Putting square holes in round pegs. In this sense, the chemical warfare agents would actually incapacitate a victim. However, by the military definition of this type of agent, incapacitation really refers to the impairments that are temporary and non-lethal. Thus, riot control agents are considered to be incapacitating because they cause temporary loss of vision due to blepharospasm. Very strange word. But they are considered military incapacitants because the loss of vision does not last very long. Although these incapacitating agents may result from physiological changes such as the mucous membrane irritation, that's the drainage of the nose, or diarrhea or hyperthermia. The term incapacitating agent, as the military defines it, is a compound that produces temporary and non-lethal impairment of military performance based off of psychobehavioral effects, or CNS, central nervous system effects. Okay. Why do I say all this, guys? Well, we are really going to get into the world of the CIA and what all they've been up to. Not to say that everything is a conspiracy theory, but let's just start piecing this little puzzle together. COVID is released, created in our universities, funded by our government, weaponized by the military of China. It's released, it's dispersed, however it is. And then now we have the means and motives, capabilities, and the funding codes to approve it, to now disperse incapacitating agents to destroy the virus. But little beknownst to the public, there could also be a very nefarious agent, ever so slightly added to the aerosolized dispersal of a disinfectious agent. And who knows the ramifications, the psychological behavior? There may be certain people in the public who are very susceptible to the suggestion of these psychoactive drugs. I've always said, if you want to take down a city, go through the sewers and disperse over the air these psychoactive drugs and watch the city tear itself apart. Does anybody remember Batman Beyond, where Scarecrow releases a psychoactive drug that made everybody hallucinate and see their worst nightmares, turned everybody violent? Oh, we have the means to go there and beyond. We have the ability to literally turn people into the rage virus, ever so created for the zombie movie lovers. And don't forget, good old DHS and DOD, we got our training on how to handle the zombie hordes, right? Interesting things to put together. Enjoy your day. I'm Doug Thornton. This is American Medicta. Stay frosty. The enemy's out there.